Hi, I'm Rodger Newbold. Welcome to this episode from Experienced Photography. I'm glad to welcome you here. Hey, Matt just stepped behind me into the edit bay to direct this installment. Hey there, Matt.
Hello, everyone.
In our last chapter, we covered how all the elements of the exposure triangle could possibly work together. So they'd be hand in hand, so that the camera becomes incredibly functional. So by now, you should have knowledge of the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO controls and their individual different functions. We should now also understand how to generate reciprocal exposure operations to produce a desired look or action or effect in a photograph. Today, we're going to discuss depth of field. This is really important. So the definition of depth of field is the distance between the nearest and the furthest object that have been selected that give an image that would be judged to be in focus within the camera. Or so much for definitions. Put another way, it might be when I focus on one point, what else is in focus? Now, Matt, can we see example number 1, please? Example number 1, it is illustrating what the depth of field, or DOF, really is. Now, to the side of that, there are some asterisks. These indicate words that are my terms only. I don't know if anybody else uses them, but for what we're going to be talking about, I'm using these words. And that's isolated, that's a limited amount of depth of field, or incorporated, which is a lot of depth of field. For all of our illustrations that we put online, any of these figures, remember that you can just tap the K key on your keyboard, and then it will halt the progression of the video. You can write down whatever you need to do, tap the K key again, and you're off to the races. Now that we have defined depth of field, I'm going to set forth 3. These are giant rules dealing with depth of field. They are unbreakable, unchangeable, and written in steel. These are truly cosmic facts. Now, commit these to memory, write them down, keep a set in your camera bag for a year until you really feel comfortable with them. Now, the very first one is depth of field increases. It gets larger, more depth of field as the focal length decreases. Number 2 is depth of field increases as the f-stop increases. It gets tinier, you get more depth of field. Number 3, depth of field increases as the camera to subject distance increases. So Matt, if you'll put figure 1 up on the screen, I'll wait. These are important. Be sure and write them down. Now let's get on with explaining what happens to a picture. Point A. Depth of field increases as the focal length decreases. You see in figure 2. Figure 2, we're talking about it, is the lens optical magnification of a lens. Not the physical length of the lens, the optical focal length. So as you'll notice here in the figure, all lenses shown here are set at 15 feet from the subject. And so you'll notice all of the lenses are also set at f4. So this test will show only the change in depth of field as a result of the focal length change. Now, a 50 millimeter lens, that's the middle one on your chart, is considered to be normal or regular focal length on a full frame camera. We achieve a normal amount of depth of field, and if you are using an APS-C or crop sensor camera, its equivalent focal length will be approximately 35 millimeters. Now, normal depth of field for a 50 at f4 and set at 15 feet will provide good focus from approximately 12 to 19 feet. Now, please look at that figure. You'll also notice that depth of field is not evenly split from the front to the rear. Approximately a third of the way in front of your focus point is in focus, and 2/3 behind the focus point will be in focus. So it's asymmetrical. A 24 millimeter lens, the one on the left, is shorter than the normal focal length on a full frame camera. It's a wide angle. Its equivalent focal length on an APS-C or crop sensor is approximately 16 millimeter. And again, as you'll notice on figure 2, that the depth of field is increased significantly when we decrease the focal length from 50 to 24, going from a normal to a wide. Now, depth of field for a 24 millimeter at f4, when it's set at 15 feet, will provide good focus from approximately 8 feet to about 280 feet. That's a lot of depth of field. Again, please be aware that depth of field is not split evenly front to rear. 1/3 in front, 2/3 behind. The third lens on our chart is a 70 millimeter. It's considered to be a short telephoto, or longer than normal focal length on a full frame camera. It's getting into a nice range for portrait and people photography. Equivalent focal length on an APS-C or crop sensor is approximately 50 millimeters. Now, depth of field for a 70, when it is set at f4, fairly wide open, and it's focused for 15 feet, will provide a good depth of field from about 17 feet, 14 feet to 17 feet, get it the right way around, and the focus is very limited. It's good for isolation. It is not split evenly, 1/3 again in front, 2/3 in back. Now, I got this information about depth of field from a iPhone app that I have called Simple DOF. You can download it, put it on your phone. It's an amazing thing. If you're having trouble understanding depth of field, this visually will tell you what to do and what the boundaries are, and it makes it easy in the field because all you have to do is look at your phone and you can tell what your depth of field is going to be. Point B, depth of field increases as f-stop increases. So let's see figure number 3. Number 3 is all about f-stops. Now, here you'll notice that all the lenses are the exact same focal length. And all of the lenses are also set for 20 feet from the subject. So this test will show only the changes that were made by changing the f-stop setting. So take a look at figure 3. That depth of field is increased significantly when we increase the f-stop from f8, or 1.8, to 16. So as it moves from a big hole to a tiny hole, you see that the depth of field becomes much greater. Point C, depth of field increases as camera to subject distance increases. So look at figure number 4 here. You'll notice all the lenses again are the exact same focal length. You'll notice all of the f-stops are set at the same aperture. This test will show only the changes made to your depth of field because of the change of the camera distance to the subject distance. Little depth of field, more depth of field, woohoo, a lot more depth of field. As you observe in figure 4, that depth of field increases significantly as the distance from the camera to the subject is increased. Thus, it proves big rule number 3. Now, figure 5 will give you an indication of changing f-stop and focal length and how the depth of field changes relate. You may isolate a subject when you're shooting with, say, a telephoto 200 millimeter and you're using f2.8. You'll notice in that case that your depth of field very much isolates what you want. So if you want one person to stand out, one item, one rock, one bird, whatever it is that you photograph, you want to isolate that from the rest of the crowd and make that the most prominent point. If you use a longer focal length and a fat, big, wide f-stop, you get isolated depth of field. Or you may incorporate all of the subject matter if you use something wide like a 28 and at f22. So Matt, let's take a peek at figure number 5. Now as you look at that chart, your depth increases as it goes to the right, and your focal length increases as it drops to the bottom of that chart. In figure 5, you can easily spot the depth of field changes and their desired effect in those small pictures. You can see the girl in the top left, once you're using f2.8 and a long focal length, that anything in the background is basically gone. But if you're using a 28 millimeter and using a very small f-stop, everything, the girl's in focus, the trees in focus, the buildings in focus, all of the people clear down the lines in focus. So that will give you the idea. Isolate or incorporate. Now, I want to tell you a story. One of our trips to the Grand Canyon, we were at a viewpoint, and we had our students lined up, and they were all shooting different things in the Grand Canyon, getting the clouds, and they were getting the rocks, and they were getting the depth of the canyon and everything. And some other people pulled up alongside, and they walked out to the viewpoint. This young lady was trying to get a picture of Grandma and the far reaches of the canyon in one picture. Now, it's easily done. Get it all in focus. It's easy. But the young lady kept telling Grandma, just back up. back up a little, just a little bit more. And I finally had to butt in and say, Grandma's 4 inches from oblivion. She goes any further back, you're not going to have a grandma. And the young lady asked, "Oh, how do I do this?" So I looked at her camera. We found out how to change it from a normal focal length, or where she had it zoom setting, and zoom it to a wider angle. And we chose a different f-stop. It was plenty bright. And then I had the young lady step back away from Grandma. And all of a sudden, Grandma and the canyon were all in focus. So before you do a tragedy and waste a good grandma, let's learn how to run this camera. Let's learn how to take advantage of the depth of field to either isolate or incorporate. These 3 rules, these are cast in cement, iron, steel, whatever you want. You can't change them. So all you have to do is do it right and use the controls that you have. I really hope this has been an eye-opener for you. I hope it's been a tremendous learning experience. So please subscribe, ring that little bell, give us a big thumbs up if you like this. It'll keep us going, keep Facebook happy, keep everybody, YouTube, everybody be excited. And I hope that you're getting something from these. Now, I would appreciate if you'd send us your questions. I've loved what we've had so far. I always look forward to them and answering those questions. We talked about several things about which camera to choose. I got a very pertinent question back from a gentleman named Stuart. He says, also remind your crowd that large format cameras and film is still a viable medium. When I was talking about selecting a camera, I was pretty adamant about the fact that I have left film, but that doesn't mean you have to. And it applies to that. And if you want something bigger, you can go to 4x5, or you can go to a giant 8x10 sheet of film. I know Stuart at one point went on one of our workshops, and he did carry an 8x10 Wisner wooden 4x5 camera, or 8x10 camera. It's a big lug, but magnificent images. So again, choose the camera that you want. Talking with a group yesterday, one of my friends said, but I like this little point and shoot camera that I use. He has a little zoom camera, just a fixed lens with a zoom. And he said, this fits me because I'm traveling. He was a salesman. He always had a camera with him. He took a lot of pictures directly from the car, and he does marvelous candid work. It was great to see him. But he said, this little teeny camera works for me. Hey, I'm not trying to change anybody's opinion. I'm just saying, choose the camera that works for you and learn how to use it. I hope that makes sense to you all. Thanks for your questions. We'll be back again very soon with another great episode from Experience Photography, tailoring them just for you. So this is Rodger signing out for now. Thanks ever so much. We appreciate your watching, and we'll see you in the future. Goodbye.